What's up, guys? Welcome back to After the Credits. We just finished up Demon's Souls last night, and I've got some mixed opinions on it, so we'll definitely dive into all of that. But the reason this game was on my radar is I absolutely fell in love with Dark Souls 3. That was my first Souls game that really hooked me, and since my first playthrough of Dark Souls 3, I've played that game numerous times, and I just absolutely love it. So I was always kind of looking at Demon's Souls being like, I'd like to get to that at some point. I didn't have a PS5 at the time, but I saw the remake. I knew it looked really nice. And I thought it would be entertaining to jump into that, see where the Souls series began, and see what I thought of the original. So we're going to be talking about that today. Thank you guys so much again for joining me. And without further ado, let's just dive into it. Demon's Souls is not From Software's first project by any means. They had a game called King's Quest back in the day. I think it was on PS1 or 2. That looks really obscure and looks really hard to play. But the whole Souls series, like I said before, started with Demon's Souls. It came out originally on the PS3, I think in 2009-ish. And Bluepoint remade it in 2022, which is the version that I played through, and that's the footage you're seeing behind me is from the 2022 remake. I want to give a huge shout out to Bluepoint for remaking this game. It's a great piece of history to look back on, being that it spawned such a legendary series afterwards, and they lovingly recreated it, and they had some really sweet, touching messages in the end credits to some of the original team members of the game that have since passed since the creation, which was really nice to see. And they put a lot of effort into this. I mean, they enhanced the visuals exponentially, which I think is a testament to the fact that this is a PS5 exclusive, and when a developer can prioritize building a game for one console and not having to go multi-platform, even though I hate console exclusives, when they're able to focus on one piece of hardware, they can really push that hardware to its limits and get the most out of it. And I think Demon's Souls is probably the best example of a game that takes the PS5's hardware and pushes it as hard and as far as they can. Literally one of the best looking games on the console. I don't think it's any dispute. The whole game looks incredible top to bottom, and the performance in this game is also top notch. So even though it's got incredible graphic fidelity, there's no hit to performance, which is crucial in a game like this. There's nothing worse than playing a Souls-like, or in this case, a Souls game, and having frame rate issues or performance issues. There's none of that to be found here. It's a beautiful remake, and they did a fantastic job piecing this together and being able to deliver this project to a whole new audience, because going back to the 09 version would be quite difficult. I think it's actually pretty hard to play Dark Souls 1, the original. So yeah, going back even further to Demon's Souls would be quite a process in my opinion, but they did a great job. I just want to make sure I start the conversation with that the remake is definitely the best way to play Demon's Souls in 2024. This game is buttery smooth to play, like I mentioned before. It feels like a modern Souls game, and I don't know, I can't comment on whether or not Bluepoint did some gameplay adjustments from the original. I don't know. Like I said, I haven't played the OG Demon's Souls. However, there's nothing really out of the ordinary as far as the game feel from this game. Even comparing it to Dark Souls 3, I think they're very similar. So it's not going to be an adjustment for any Souls veteran to go back and play this game as far as the game feel. All of that stuff is the same, so you'll be able to hop right in like riding a bike when you get into this one. I think that's fantastic. Again, it's just a positive for this game. If you've already got the Souls formula kind of dialed in, this game's going to be easy to jump into. Now, one of the more kind of interesting and, I guess, shocking points of this game is the way that the game is structured. So in the Souls games, you pretty much follow a linear story where you gotta go through the areas that are set in front of you, and you clear your path on the way to the boss, and you just keep doing that until the game ends. This game is a little bit different. It's similar in a lot of ways to Bloodborne, in the fact that you essentially spawn in the nexus of this game, and there's a bunch of basically headstones that represent the great gods, basically, of these 5 different regions. So then you approach the tombstone and you go into worlds, basically. So there isn't like multiple bonfires in each section. So if you go to the first world, so it would be world 1-1, you go in, and that one archstone that's sitting there when you spawn into that world is the only archstone in the entire world 1-1. So, and then you kill the boss of 1-1, and then you unlock 1-2, and that cycle kind of repeats. You have one archstone at the very beginning of that section, and there is no midway archstones for you to be able to utilize, which is different, very different. There's even additional bonfire, or I guess lanterns in Bloodborne through each section that you can go to. But this game's structured very differently, and each archstone represents an entirely separate section of that world. So if you know there's going to be a boss at the end, you know you're not going to get saved by a bonfire or an archstone anywhere else in that world. So it has quite a bit more tension. But the negative of that is this game's got some crazy runbacks to bosses and some miserable runbacks to bosses. And again, this formula wasn't completely dialed in at the time. I think Dark Souls 3 is the best example of this genre. I think Dark Souls 3 is built incredibly well. I think Lies of P is built maybe even better, having the waypoints stationed right outside boss rooms, so you can just run back into the boss and do what you need to do. Since this is kind of the first of its kind, they weren't really sure how to do it, so there's a lot of runbacks in this game. So if you are interested in playing, just be prepared for that. You got to really buckle up for some of these. In particular, the Flame Lurker boss in 3-2, I think World 3, Level 2. Flame Lurker, not a difficult boss, but you have to run through this mine section for like 7 minutes until you realize that there's a shortcut if you just turn the opposite way, which I didn't realize for 30 minutes. So I did a 7-minute run back for about 30 attempts and just kept dying. Flame Lurker, it was terrible. And then, of course, I discovered the shortcut and then beat him on that attempt. So, yikes. But if you don't find the shortcut in the map, there's some killer long runbacks. And then there is some runbacks in the game that you can't be bailed out with a shortcut either. You're just stuck making the long run back, which is very frustrating. But again, like I said before, it's hard to really use it as a pain. I mean, it is a pain point. We have to critique the game as it sits and with our experiences that we've learned from other games. But at the same time, we are looking at a game that was made in 2009 that doesn't have a formula to go off of. But it is definitely a pain point, and you're gonna feel it if you're used to modern Souls games. Those runbacks are crucial and painful in a lot of ways. Now, obviously, when we're talking about a game in this genre, the most important thing is difficulty, right? These games are pretty hard to approach just based on the public perception that these games are incredibly difficult to play. And while that is true in some senses, it is a hard game. It's not necessarily a game that's going to hold your hand all the way through. So you do have to be prepared to take deaths, be prepared to, have to learn some things along the way. But as someone that's played a lot of Souls-likes, and I've played a lot of Dark Souls 3, this game wasn't anywhere near as hard as Dark Souls 3 or Bloodborne, not even close to those difficulties. I think this is one of the easier games that I played. One of the main reasons for that is Demon's Souls is structured around a lot of gimmick boss fights. There's not a lot of bosses that are really a true test of your abilities with the controller against a boss that's just sufficiently difficult. It's a lot of different gimmicks kind of factored in, and once you learn the gimmick, the boss is kind of a cakewalk. So a good example is the very first boss in the game. The 1-1 boss is called Phalanx, and it's basically this tower of little muck-looking dudes that hold shields. And throughout the entirety of World 1-1, you get loaded up with fire bombs. So if you just put 2 and 2 together, that you've been given a lot of fire bombs in this world, and you throw fire bombs at Phalanx, it just absolutely shreds all of the little guys off of the main boss and exposes its inner core that you can then hit and destroy. And that happens a lot throughout the game. There's just a lot of circumstances where there's a gimmick to them. There are 2 fights, well, let me say 3 fights in particular, that are kind of a skill check, that there's not really gimmicks to utilize. One being Flame Lurker, which honestly, in my opinion, Flame Lurker was the most difficult boss that I dealt with in this game. Flame Lurker has a lot of AoE fire attacks that kind of have a little bit bullshit hitboxes, in my opinion. But Flame Lurker is definitely the boss I struggle with the most, but he doesn't really have a gimmick. The only real gimmick you can use against Flame Lurker is to use the sticky white slime, which is the magic gel that you can put on your weapon, and that'll increase your damage against him substantially. But he's a pretty decent fight. My favorite boss design in the game comes from the boss, the Penetrator. The Penetrator. I think his design is incredibly cool, but I one-tried him. But he is a straight-up one-on-one battle where, you know, there's no real gimmick there. You just kind of got to beat him up. And then the final boss of the game, King Allant, well, that's not technically the fight. The second to last boss, King Allant, is definitely a skill check boss at the end of the game that I beat in one try as well. But hey man, I'm not trying to brag or nothing, but those bosses are gimmick free, and there's 18 bosses in the game and 3 examples of skill bosses that you have to deal with. The rest are gimmickable, and you can beat probably at soul level 1 without any issue, as long as you know what you need to do against them. So again, being this is the start of the franchise, they didn't know what they wanted to do with bosses yet. They hadn't come to the conclusion that people wanted a really strong challenge. So this is an interesting take, but not necessarily my favorite. I didn't ever really get that feeling of true reward, and that true feeling of excitement after beating the boss, because I just didn't struggle very much. I did feel good after I beat Flame Lurker, though, for sure. But other than that, bosses were cakewalk in this game. The main enemy I had, the main struggle, again to go back to my previous point, was the runbacks. Those were kind of a pain in the butt cheeks. But yeah, all in all, I mean, this game is very easy from a Souls perspective. And if you're not interested in Souls games, or you've been scared by Souls games, I really recommend just playing through one. I think that getting through a Souls game really opens you up to this genre, and as more and more companies make Souls-likes, as we like to say, the genre is getting bigger, and if you just if you see yourself through a game, it's going to make those games all feel much more approachable. I'd recommend Dark Souls 3, not necessarily Demon Souls, but Dark Souls 3, Lies of P are great options. Or you can get Demon Souls 2. I mean, Demon Souls is on PlayStation Plus, so it's easily accessible. You don't have to pay for it, obviously, unless you don't have PlayStation Premium. But anyways, we're going off on a whole tangent there. But all in all, I think this was a very average experience. I wouldn't say it was bad. It was pretty much just, it felt like 20 hours of for me, very low excitement points. I didn't get like I said before, the real excitement of feeling that moral victory over a boss. Just didn't really happen. I think the graphics are great. The sound design is incredible. There was never any question marks popping up into my head about sounds in the game. I just wish there was a lot less. Personally, I don't like the gimmick boss fights, and this game is full of gimmick boss fights, so that obviously takes away from my overall kind of opinions on the game. The long runbacks are not my favorite thing. And then obviously with the leveling and being able to approach any level at any time, the mapping on which boss to take on at any given time is really confusing as well. So I don't necessarily like that structure, but more or less, I did still enjoy the game, just being able to look at it from the perspective of, oh, this is where the inspiration for like this boss came from. You can see little glimpses of that through the game, and that's really cool. But all in all, I think this game was really just kind of mediocre, and I feel bad about it. I don't want to give the game a bad review, and I think if I played it in 2009, I would have a much different opinion on it. And I think if you did play the game back then, this is going to be a great way to replay it, and clearly the best way to play Demon's Souls, you know, in the modern era is with the remake. But going back to it after the games that I've beaten up to this point, it just doesn't hold up for me, but it's still a great experience to at least have gone through one time. Doubt I'll go through it again though, just because I just kind of saw all there is to see. Alright guys, but that's going to do it for this episode of After the Credits. Leave your comments down below if you have more questions. I know that I don't cover everything that the game has to offer, and that's not the point of the video. I'm not really making a review per se. I'm just talking like I would love to make a podcast one day with a group of dudes that like to play games, so we could just talk about games and stuff like that, and then these videos would be obsolete because I'd have these discussions with some people, but I don't have that. So this is just kind of like my podcast thing where I just talk about games, and that's kind of what it is. But if you have any questions, or if you want to ask about certain bosses, or my thoughts on certain bosses or certain things, please leave comments below. I'll respond to every one of them. I love talking to you guys in the comments, so feel free to do that. I'd love to hear what you guys thought about Demon's Souls yourselves. Well, I'd like to hear if you played it before and came to the remake, or if the remake was your first attempt at the game. But yeah, been fun. Sorry for the delay on this upload as well. I think it's been a week or two since the last episode. It's going to be another week or two or more for the next one as well. Busy season, so I'm really tied up. I just have some free time now, which is great because I'm getting the video out. But yeah, just stick with me. We'll have another video out as soon as I can get it for you. Consider leaving a like below and comment your thoughts, of course. Love to talk to you down there. Take care of yourselves. Talk to you guys real soon. See you guys.